Hello everyone. My name is Muhammad Zikri Alfurqan with the student number 24019056 from the class NK2-24, learning Introduction to Literature with Ma'am Leni Marilina. And in this video, I will read my short story for the literature assignment. My short story is The Boarding House by James Joyce. So this is the writer of this short story. His name is James Joyce, born in 2 February 1882 and died in 13 January in 1941. And this is the story. Mrs. Mooney was a butcher's daughter. She was a woman who was quite able to keep things for herself, a determined woman. She had married her father's foreman and opened a butcher shop near Spring Go to the Devil. He drank, plundered the till, ran headlong into debt. It was no use making him the pledge. He was sure to break out again. Buying bad meat, he ran his business. One night he went for his wife with the clever she had to sleep in a neighbor's house. After they lived apart, she went to the priest and got a separation from him, with care of the children. She would give him neither money not for food nor house room, and so he was obliged to enlist himself as a sheriff's man. He was a shabby, stupid little drunkard with a white face and a white mustache and white eyebrows. Pencil above his face a little eyes which were pink vein and raw, and all day long he sat in the bailiff's room waiting to be put on a job. Mrs. Mooney, who had taken what remained of her money out of the butcher business and set up a boarding house in a Hardwick street, was a big imposing woman. Her house had a floating population made up of tourists from Liverpool and the Isle of Man, and occasionally artisans from the music halls. Its resident population was made up of clerks from the city. She governed the house cunningly and firmly, knew when to give credit, when to be stern, and when to let things pass. All the resident young men spoke of her as the madam. Mrs. Mooney's young man paid 15 shillings a week for board and lodgings. They shared a common taste and occupation, and for this reason they were very chummy with one another. They discussed with one another the change of favorites and outsiders. Jack Mooney, the madam's son, who was clerk to a commission agent in Fleet Street, had the reputation of being a hard case. He was fond of using soldiers' obscenities. Usually he came home in the small hours. When he met his friends, he had always a good one to tell them, and he was always sure to be on a good thing, that is to say, a likely horse or likely artist. He was also handy with the meats and sang comic songs on Sunday nights. There would often be a reunion with Mrs. Mooney's front drawing room. The music hall artists would oblige, and Sheridan played waltzes and polkas and thumped accompaniments. Polly Mooney, the madam's daughter, would also sing. Polly was a slim girl of 19. She had light soft hair and a small full mouth. Her eyes, which were grey with a shade of green through them, had a bit of glancing upwards when she spoke with anyone, which made her look a little perceived Madonna. Mrs. Mooney had first sent her daughter to be a typist in a corn factory's office, but a disreputable sheriff's man used to come every other day to the office, asking to be allowed to say a word to his daughter. She had taken her daughter home again and set her to housework. As Polly was very lively, the intention was to give her the run of the young man. Besides, young men like to feel that there is a young woman not very far away. Polly, of course, flirted with the young man, but Mrs. Mooney, who was a shrewd judge, knew that the young men were only passing the time, and Mrs. Mooney began to think of sending Polly back to typewriting. Polly knew that she was being watched, but still her mother's persistent silence could not be misunderstood. There had been no open complicity between mother and daughter, no open understanding, but though people in the house began to talk of their affair, still Mrs. Mooney did not intervene. Polly began to grow a little strange in her manner, and the young man was evidently perturbed. At last, when she judged it to be the right moment, Mrs. Mooney intervened. She dealt with moral problems as Clifford deals with meat, and in this case she had made up her mind. It was bright Sunday morning of early summer, promising heat, but with a fresh breeze blowing. All the windows of the boarding house were open, and the glass curtains ballooned gently towards the streets. Beneath the red shades, the belfry of George's church sent out constant peals, and worshippers, singly or in groups, traversed the little circus before the church, revealing their purpose by the self-contained demeanor, no less than by the little volumes of their gloved hands. Mrs. Mooney glanced instinctively at the little clock on the mantelpiece as soon as she had become aware through her reverie that the bells of George's church had stopped ringing. It was 17 minutes past 11. She would have lots of time to have to marry out with Mr. Doran, and then catch short 12 at Marlborough Street. She was sure she would win. To begin with, she had all the weight of social opinion on her side. She was an outraged mother. She had allowed him to live beneath her roof, assuming that he was a man of honor, and he had simply abused her hospitality. He was 34 or 35 years of age, so that youth could not be pleaded as his excuse, nor could ignorance be his excuse. Since he was a man who had seen something of the world, he had simply taken advantage of Polly's youth and inexperience. That was evident. The question was, what reparation would he make? There must a reparation made in such a case. It is all very well for the man. He can go his ways as if nothing had happened, having had his moment of pleasure, but the girl has to bear the burn. Some mothers would be content to patch up such an affair for a sum of money. She had known cases of it, but she would not do so, for her only open reparation could make up for the loss of her daughter's honor marriage. Nearly the half hour she stood up and surveyed herself, and the big glass decisive expression of her great florid face satisfied her, and she thought of some mothers she knew who could not get their daughters off their hands. Mr. Doran was very anxious indeed. This Sunday morning he had made 2 attempts to shave, but his hand had been so unsteady that he had been obliged to desist. 3 days reddish bird frigid his jaws, and every 2 or 3 minutes a mist gathered on his glasses, so that he had to take them off and polish them with his pocket handkerchief. The recollection of his confession of the night before was caused acute pain to him, and at the end he had so magnified his sin that he was almost thankful at being afforded a loophole of reparation. The harm was done. What could he do now but marry her or run away? He could not brazen it out. The affair would be sure to be talked of, and his employer would be certain hear of it. Dublin is such a small city, everyone knows everyone else's business. He felt his heart leaped warmly in his throat as he heard, in his excited imagination, old Mr. Leonard calling out in his rasping voice, "Send Mr. Doran here, please." All his long years of service gone for nothing, all his industry and diligence thrown away. As a young man, he had sown his wild oats. Of course, he had boasted of his free thinking and denied the existence of God to his companions in public houses, but that was all past and done with nearly. He still bought a copy of Reynolds' newspaper every week, but he attended to his religious duties and for 9/10 of the year lived a regular life. He had money enough to settle down on. It was not that, but the family would look down on her. First of all, there was her disreputable father, and then her mother's boarding house was beginning to get a certain fame. He had a notion that he was being had. He could imagine his friends talking of their affair and laughing. She was a little vulgar. Sometimes she said, "I seen," and if I had have known, but what would Grandma matter if he really loved her? He could not make up his mind whether to like her or despise her for what she had done. Of course, he had done it too. His instinct urged him to remain free and not to marry. Once are married, you are done for, it said. Well, he was sitting with her on the side of the bed. Mary came to the door and said that this Mrs. wanted to see him in the parlor. He stood up to put on his coat and waistcoat. More helpless than ever, when he was dressed, he went over to her to comfort her. It would be all right, never fear. He left her crying on the bed and moaning softly, "Oh my God." Going down the stairs, his glasses became so dim with moisture that he had to take them off and polish them. He launched to ascend through the roof and fly away for another country where he would never hear again of his trouble, and yet four pushed him downstairs step by step. The implacable faces of his employer of the madam stared upon his discomfiture. On the last flight of the stay, past Jack Mooney, who was coming up for the pantry nursing 2 bottles of Bass. They saluted coldly, and the lover's eyes rested for a second or two on in a thick bulldog face and a pair of thick short arms. When he reached the foot of the staircase, he glanced up and saw Jack regarding him from the door of the returns room. Polly sat for a while, a little time on the side of the bed, crying. Then she dried her eyes and went over to the looking-glass. She dipped the end of the towel in the water jug and refreshed her eyes with the cool water. She looked at herself in profile and readjusted a hairpin above her ear. Then she went back to the bed again and sat on the foot. She regarded the pillows for a long time as the sight of them awakened in her mind secret, immovable memories. She rested the nape of her neck against the cold iron bedrail and fell into a reverie. There was no longer any perturbation visible on her face. She waited on patiently, almost cheerfully, without alarm, her memories gradually giving place to hope and vision of the future. Her hopes and visions were so intricate that she no longer saw the white pillows on which her gaze was fixed, or remembered that she was waiting for anything. At last, she heard her mother calling. She started to her feet and ran to the banisters. "Polly, Polly." "Yes, Mama. Come down, dear. Mr. Doran wants to speak to you." Then she remembered what she had been waiting for. So that's it, everyone. That's the end of the story, The Boarding House by James Joyce. Thank you for listening and goodbye.